Whoa. Hello, everyone. Hi. Oh, shoot, sorry. It's been a minute. Okay, can you all hear me? Cool. Speaking on behalf of the Cranbrook Fiber Department, we acknowledge that our studios are on the unceded land of Wawiatanong. We recognize and honor the first people of this land, the Anishinaabe people, known as the Three Fires Confederacy, comprised of the Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi, who continue to love and tend this land here, whose homes are where we are blessed to be. Cranbrook Academy, like almost all property in the United States, stands on land obtained in unconscionable ways from Indigenous peoples. Our education has benefited and continues to benefit from access to land originally gained through the exploitation of others. Knowing where we live and work does not change the past, but a thorough understanding of the ongoing consequences of this past can empower us in our research, teaching, and creative practices to dismantle the ongoing damaging effects of settler colonialism, genocide, and myths of white supremacy to create a future that supports human flourishing and justice for all individuals. We give respect to the first peoples of the land and to the more than human world that is our kin and teachers of stewardship. It's my honor to welcome Tanya Aguiñiga. I practiced and messed up. Who was born in 1978 in San Diego, California, and raised in Tijuana, Mexico. An artist, designer, and craftsperson, Tanya works with traditional craft materials like natural fibers and collaborates with other artists and activists to create sculptures, installations, performances, and community-based art projects. Drawing on her upbringing as a binational citizen who daily crossed the border from Tijuana to San Diego for school, Tanya's work speaks of the artist's experience of her divided identity and aspires to tell the larger and often invisible stories of the transnational community. Tanya began her career by creating collaborative installations with the Border Art Workshop, Taller de Art Fronterizo, an artist collective that addressed political and human rights issues at the US-Mexico border. The artist co-built and for 6 years ran a community center in Tijuana aimed at bringing attention through arts initiatives to injustices that the local community faced. Tanya has maintained this spirit of activism and community collaboration throughout her career, going on to create many performances and installations that involve the participation of other artists, activists, and community members. In her installations, furniture, and wearable designs, Tanya often works with cotton wool and other textiles, drawing upon Mesoamerican weaving and traditional forms. In 2016, in response to the deep polarization about the US-Mexico border, Tanya created Ambos, Art Made Between Opposite Sides, an ongoing series of projects that provides a platform for binational artists. Her inaugural Ambos project, Border Quipu, used brightly colored strands of fabric to create Quipu, an Andean pre-Columbian organizational system that recorded the daily commutes to and from the United States. Tanya holds an MFA in furniture design from Rhode Island School of Design and a BA from San Diego State University. She was just awarded the Heinz Award in Arts and Humanities and is a United States Artist Target Fellow in the field of crafts and traditional arts, a National Association of Latino Arts and Cultures awardee, Creative Capital Grant awardee, and a recipient of an Americans for the Arts Johnson Fellowship for Artists Transforming Communities. She has had major solo exhibitions at the Smithsonian American Art Museum in Washington, D.C., and the Museum of Arts and Design in New York, among others. Her work is in the permanent collection of LACMA, Hammer Museum, Milwaukee Art Museum, the Mint Museum, the Smithsonian, Pittsburg Museum, Museum of Arts and Design, among others. We're grateful that Tanya made the trek from LA to come visit us, and it's been such a pleasure and a joy to welcome you into our studios. So without further ado, please help me in welcoming Tanya to speak.
Thank you so much. Okay, so I was trying to think of what stuff to include and how to include it, and I know that we have a limited amount of time, and I tend to overshare, so I am going to go pretty fast. with a lot of the stuff, and you'll just have to remember if there's something that you have a question about to ask in the end. And we're kind of going to meander like through time, like backwards and forwards. So my name is Tanya Aguiñiga, and so a lot of what I do is around craft. And so for me, craft is many things. So craft is art, craft is design, craft is culture, craft is object, craft is human. And in any given time, for me, craft is one of these things or all of the things. And so a lot of what I do formally is also meandering. So between art, design, and craft formally, and content, function, and technique informally, which is a very like frontier sensibility where you're constantly having to shift who you are to be on one side or the other of the border. And so my background, let's see if this thing works. My background is in furniture design. And so I like this meme of plywood a lot because it shows multi-directionality of plywood and like how that is what gives plywood its strength. And I like thinking about systems that I learned in furniture design and how I translated it and applied it to fiber. And so for me, a lot of the stuff relates super directly to weaving and to working in soft fiber, in fibrous fiber. And very recently, I started reading this really incredible book called The Life of Lines by Tim Ingold, and it was such a revelatory moment when he started talking about that joinery in carpentry is related to joinery in weaving and in working in fiber, and how both are things where you're trying to join two disparate elements and tying them together in a knot or in some type of joint. And I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. Like this is describes so much what I do, because in having studied furniture and then going into fiber, but also in working on the border, a lot of what I do is trying to tie together these two separate things. And so I grew up in San Diego and Tijuana. That's a map to show you. You can kind of see, I'm so excited to have a laser pointer. So yes, all the way over there. And so Tijuana is on the Mexican side, right below San Diego. And so I grew up a few blocks away from the US-Mexico border fence. Again, laser pointer. This side is very stepped on. The Mexican side is used by people as a normal beach. The US side is unused because it's a super militarized zone where it's super controlled and people can't access it. And so I grew up crossing the border every day from age 4 to 18 until I graduated high school to go to school in the US, not because my parents wanted me to come to the US, but because I didn't have a babysitter. And so it was just kind of by default that I ended up crossing and going to school in the US. And so the border is another massive thing that's always in and out and very present in my being and in my work. In the way that I relate to space. And so the border is also something that has so many different ways of talking about it. So it's a metaphor, it's a place, it's an identity, it's a thing, and it's people. And again, all of these things can exist separate from one another. A lot of things mesh and inform each other, and a lot of things happen, like at different times within our bodies. So a lot of what I do in a lot of these travels is educate people also about that art at the border has existed for a very long time, and that the border is massive, and that there are so many different states on both the US side and the Mexican side, because Mexico, its full name is the United States of Mexico, so it's also made up of different states. And so art at the border, here's a little tiny introduction for you of just art at the border in San Diego and Tijuana. So very old ass photos, because these were before things were digital. I had no idea that in my hometown of Playas de Tijuana, which is what's pictured in this photo. So we live by the bull ring by the sea is one thing that marks our town, but also the border fence. And so this is one of the first performances that the Border Art Workshop did. And so from, very early in my life, without me knowing it, artists had been using the border as a site for dialogue. And so this is where the border fence is now. And you can kind of see a makeshift border fence that starts to kind of happen. This is one of the images from 1984. And so the Border Art Workshop was the group that coined the term border art. And they were mostly, a lot of the work that they did was performance-based. So in Tijuana, we had this biennial that would happen, started in the 90s, that was called Insight. And so they would invite international artists and local artists to come and do interventions at the border in Tijuana that were about border issues. And so then this is Marco Ramirez Erres, Toy and Horse. So at this point, I was already a teenager and old enough to kind of understand the significance of it. And so I had a really huge impact on my thinking of the border and the reality that we lived in. And it straddled the actual physical border line that's on the ground. This is Richard Liu's Border Door. So this is 1988, and so this is the fence that existed at that time was just this little bit of like barbed wire. And so Richard Liu installed this door, had all these keys, and then went around and gave the keys to all the little kids in the neighborhood in Tijuana. 2005, Javier Telles, One Flew Over the Void. They shot a man in a cannon from the Mexican side over to the US side. So we used to be able to do cooler stuff. Ron Rael, very recent, 2019, his teeter-totter installed on the wall. This one is actually installed close to El Paso, so this is in Texas. And so I started working with the Border Art Workshop and with the border fence and with issues of immigration starting in 1997. So I met my mentor, Michael Schnorr. He was one of my instructors in community college, and he brought me into the fold and kind of let me be part of also like learning how art can be used as a tool for empowerment. So a lot of the work that we did was these multiple installations all over, mostly in Mexico. Some of them would travel to different places depending on what was happening, but they were all against Operation Gatekeeper, which was this first strategic reinforcement of the US-Mexico border, which diverted all migration routes for people to cross through the desert, and so then it just massively increased the amount of deaths that were occurring, and is still kind of the tactic that the US uses. So a lot of what I did with the Border Art Workshop was also to learn how to work with community, how to do community organizing. And so a big thing that I did was co-built and run this community center that was made out of garage doors that were discarded by the US. And it was a land squat, so it was autonomous from the Mexican government, and it was run by women. And we were the primary source of education. So a lot of the projects that we did were using art as a way to protect the community from governmental brutality, but also as a source of primary education for a lot of young kids. But a lot of what was happening, so I started working there when I was 19, and I stopped when I was 25. And a lot of the stuff that was happening was my mentor, who was an older white man, would just show up with like wads of cash and like try to solve problems by just throwing money at it. And so I ended up having to figure out, okay, like what are we really doing here? Are we really empowering the community? Are we just enabling? Like, why is it that nobody helps me anymore? And so I started feeling like, no, there has to be different ways, and I need to go away and go to college far away and like really learn how to do like actual like, you know, things with a little bit of distance so I can come back with a better understanding of how to work with community. And so this is a really good chart that is from a book called, it's a creative time book. I think it's called Living as Form. And so it kind of goes through, you know, when you're working with community, like when is things just manipulation, when is it therapy, when is it informing, consultation, placation, partnership, delegated power, citizen control, and kind of how that informs the relationships that we have with communities and us as the facilitator and the community, how we're using them. And so me and craft, so we did the little border detour backward in time. So I started, in furniture design. So I spent a long time thinking I wanted to do furniture design. And so immediately I started kind of having like like, like I was like, I don't know. And I started really missing my culture, my community, the warmth, the texture, of being in Tijuana. And a lot of it was also, really questioning, like, who makes the things and why are they making them? And really yearning to, like, learn through my hands. And so a bunch of these are, in the lecture, I didn't really include any images of just, like, straight up, like, fiber work or straight up furniture. It's a lot of just community-based projects and questions that they bring up for me. And so this is a really awesome project because it was one that I did, I think in 2008 in Grand Rapids, and it was called Furniture City. And so it was exploring the history of furniture design in Michigan, which the poster that's in the back lists, it's over 8,000 factories that used to be in Michigan, but mostly centered around Grand Rapids. And then when I ended up moving back to California after studying at RISD, a lot of it was also thinking about, like, how do I want to make a living and how do I want to do a studio? And so in the beginning, I was just working out of my garage, and then I ended up getting a very big award and was able to buy equipment, because at that point I didn't have money to make things because furniture machines are so expensive. And so on the left side, you can see me in my very fancy brand new Festool set. Which is a very nice, like, set of German equipment. And so a lot of it was also still trying to figure out in the beginning, like, what is my, like, entry into all of this and how do I deal with craft? And so some of it was spending a lot of time doing residencies, looking at, culture and finding intersectionality within these residencies. So this is in Alaska. And so I did 2 residencies in Alaska, spent a lot of time traveling to a lot of different native villages to learn from Alaska Native elders. A lot of it was exploring the use of material. Another residency in Delaware, and that one I was really, like, looking at a lot of the problems of, like, Delaware historically, and thinking about whose voice is missing in design. And so I ended up doing a whole residency that I was working with African hair braiders and young African American women in a vocational school that were learning about hair. And so we were also exploring how tools can empower, not just make things. Thinking about who do our skills serve. This is a project where woodworkers, or people that were trained in using wood tools, collaborated with me and the Santa Barbara Rape Crisis Center. And so we did messages of support for rape survivors on the bottoms of flip-flops, so that people, as they walked around the beach, would be leaving messages. And it was in a site that had experienced great violence as a young man who was a misogynist, killed a bunch of people, shot a bunch of students. Thinking about open source and how we share the workload when we work with community. This is a project where we did 75 move-in kits for recently housed veterans in LA and Skid Row. And really, thinking about how do we teach each other and how do we make space for change. And so this was us in the making of these kits, also teaching each other how to work with new equipment, but also bringing in new mothers so that they could also be able to make and have a studio practice with their babies around. Thinking about how does craft connect us to our ancestors. And so for me, this really massive change happened within me when I started traveling to Mexico and spending time in craft communities, mainly fiber communities in Mexico. And so I ended up spending 5 weeks doing collaborative, like, skill sharing with a few Mayan families. And so here is a picture of me learning with my teacher Rosa how to do backstrap weaving. So for those of you that don't know what backstrap weaving is, you can see the image on this side. So you tie a strap around your waist, and then this is all soft and, like, just strings. And then there's another stick here, and then you tie that to another object. And then you moving your body back and forth is what gives it the tension so that you can actually make the fabric. So then the fabric ends up becoming a witness to your bodily movement and is super directly connected to the fiber that's made. And so when I started this whole journey in like Oaxaca, and then they were using these massive step looms. And I was like, why do you guys use this? And then they're like, because the Spanish brought them and we can work fast. And so I was like, okay. And then I like got to Chiapas, which is right next to Guatemala. And I was like, whoa, like, why do you guys like weave on backstrap looms? And they're like, because we always have. And so I was like, oh, you know? And so there was this really big like light bulb moment where I was like, oh shit, I get to question what I use, you know? And it was like at that time that I started kind of like learning to like, oh, like all the ways that I was taught were super European based. And that doesn't necessarily make sense with the way that I want to work or the things that I want to have around me or the space I want things to take or the amount I want to spend on things to be able to make. And so it started this whole like kind of like avalanche of like decolonizing like the way that I work and really thinking like more expansively about the connection between the body and the fiber as witness to the body. And so then I started thinking about, oh, anything is a loom, like 2 lines in tension between anything is a loom, we can weave it. And so then doing all these really massive experiments. This is an exhibition from 2010 where I asked a bunch of community members to come over, and then everybody learned how to like plein air weave. So they just, any like 2 lines like in tangent with each other became spots for weaving. Let's see. Come on. Okay. And so also like in fiber, I also think a lot about, you know, what other topics can we explore? And so this is a big installation that was exploring postpartum depression. Thinking about what methods communicate your intention more effectively. So once I started doing performances with the fiber, I was like, oh my God, like people get so much more information out of this than when I was making furniture. And that was just because of my way of making furniture. Wasn't as expressive or as open as I found the performances and working in fiber to be. How do we care for each other while sharing skills? And how can we shape our studio practices around those who we actually want to work with? So in working in furniture design, I was also like, oh my God, I have to work with people that are trained to like not cut off their hand, which is a specific type of person, where the way that I work with fiber, I don't work on a loom. We just kind of we work really wild and loose. And everybody's kind of invited to come and like participate, whether you're like super old, whether like you've never gone to school, whether you're like a little kid, a grandma, whatever. And so the way that I've been able to carve out like my practice has been to mainly focus on having a space that's safe for femmes and a lot of our femmes of color to be able to come and participate and inform community. And so in all of these, meandering travels, the border still kept calling me back, and I kept thinking, like, how does craft help now, and how can I go back to working at the border, but from a point of craft. So again, the border is a metaphor, it's a place, identity, thing, people. And so more recently, I've been getting more into trying to understand the psychology and the trauma and the emotion that we living in proximity to the border, in proximity to violence, in proximity to this massive imperial power. And so here's this picture of the fence again. And this is from a book called Wall Disease. So it's an actual thing that they discovered. It's called Mauer-Krankheit. They discovered it in people that lived next to the Berlin Wall. So this is from the book Wall Disease. It says, "What we are seeing is just the monster's tail, and there is something terrifying about seeing the tail of a beast whose full contours and capacity and disposition we do not yet know. And so that kind of shows you like just a little snippet of, you know, like the anxiety that when you're looking at this massive thing and you're like, shit, what's behind that? You know, if they hate us this much, if they're trying to keep us away this much, like what will they do to us? And so in thinking of that, you know, it's how do I use all the things that I have amassed to help my border community in my own way? So not in a way that was shaped by, you know, my mentor, the community that I was working with before, but in things that are really true to me. And so in 2016, when the last president started running for president the first time, and when he was saying, you know, that Mexicans are rapists and all this stuff, I really just wanted to check in on my community and see, like, is everyone okay? Like, you know, are you just okay? And so I founded this project called Art Made Between Opposite Sides. And so one of the major projects that we did for the Ambos project was my border quipu. So here's a example of a quipu. So it's an organizational system that is from the Andes. And so the way that I did the quipu was that we handed people a postcard. In the beginning, it focused on transnational populations, so people that cross back and forth. And we handed them this postcard with 2 strings. And it said, these 2 strings represent the relationship between the US and Mexico, our 2 selves on either side of the border and or our mental state while crossing. Please make a knot. And so then people would make a knot that was symbolic of their experience, and then we would ask them, what are your thoughts when you cross this border? And so for people that cannot cross, do not wish to cross, are not able to cross, we would simply ask, just share a small reflection of your life at the border. And so we ended up, in the end of this project, engaging over 10,000 people. And so we went, me and my Ambos collaborators and sisters, ended up going to, you know, every car crossing, every person walking on foot, every person just hanging out by the border, every vendor, everyone we could talk to. And then all of the knots would get tied together every day so that we had a visual representation of our stigmatized community and our relationship to each other. And then all of the columns of each city were shown all together. And so some examples of the writing. What are your thoughts when you cross this border? And this is in Tijuana. A place of contradictions, a place of weight, a place where people become hysterical, a sad place, a non-place. And this is from El Paso and Juarez. The El Paso Juarez borderplex is a place in radiant negotiation with itself. Each day we wake up as one, our home of 3 states, 2 countries, and 1 heart. And so after I did the first one, I realized, oh my God, I think I need to like keep this going and finish the whole border. And so after the first massive leg, which we ended in El Paso and Juarez, we realized that there was a pattern emerging and that every city was projecting one major emotion. And so San Diego and Tijuana was anger, Nogales and Nogales was fear, Douglas and Agua Prieta was gratitude, and then El Paso and Juarez was violence. And so once we understood that, we were like, oh my God, like there's one that has gratitude, like what is this? And so then we decided to keep going, focusing mainly on the largest areas that had transnational populations. So you can see like in my region, it's 4 million people that cross back and forth. And that's almost daily. And so then it took us 3 years, but we did the entirety of the US-Mexico border. We also documented what the border looked like, pending any change that last administration, you know, was bringing on very rapidly. So here's an image of the 30-foot fence, which is what exists now. This picture is from 2018. So now what they've done is they've built a secondary 30-foot fence. So there's a corral that if you've made it across one, then you get trapped and you can't make it across the next one. We also documented what the border looks like, what is life at the border like. So this is a picture of Mexicali, which is a city that was founded by Chinese immigrants in Baja California. What the border places feel like. Another main theme was death from both sides. On the left is a memorial to a young boy. He was 12 years old and was killed by the border patrol because he was throwing rocks at the fence with his friends. And so the Border Patrol shot him through the fence from the US side, and he was released. He was never charged with anything. And then on the other side is in Juarez, a memorial to young women, victims of femicide that had been killed, who the majority of them are between the ages of 14 and 16. And so the violence comes from both sides. We also documented the art that was being made at each of the different places to try to also understand, was there a dialogue between the two sides? Do artists collaborate? Do they talk to each other? And sadly, the consensus almost in every single city was no. Each side stays on their own side and doesn't talk to each other. Whenever possible, we would do performances and collaborations and activations at the fence, whenever it was possible, whenever it was safe, and whenever it felt appropriate. And these are stills from different performances that you guys can watch on ambosproject.com. This is a sound piece where we hit the fence once each time for each person that had perished in that section of the Arizona desert. This is a backstrap weaving between me and my friend Jackie, where we were attached to each other and wove back and forth, which is illegal to cross anything through the fence. A rust print that we did on the old border fence. These corrugated walls that are up here were first used for the Vietnam War as landing mats, and then second were used for the Gulf War, and then they decided to bring them to the border and use them as the border fence. And then on the opposite side of that, you see the old Trump prototype walls, which have now been completely demolished, erased, and disappeared. And that's the rust print that we did of that fence. And so Ambos continues to collaborate. We still work together. We do projects. A lot of them are working with how do we talk to community about different border realities, family separation, different things. And so from pandemic to now, semi-pandemic, whatever we're in, just kind of want to where things have gone. So in the beginning of 2020, February 2020, so right before the lockdown, was when I did the performance with the glass suit. If you guys haven't seen it, I urge you to please watch. It's a video on Art 21. It's really amazing. But it's a longer documentation about the glass suit, what all the different components are, what they mean. But it's essentially engaging all the different senses to not be able to escape the border wall. And so I'm hearing through a vacuum that has, a glass vacuum that has fragments of the fence in it. I'm breathing through an apparatus that's actually making me breathe in and swallow border fragments. So everything, anyways. A major solo exhibition that I had that got trapped for a year and a half because of the pandemic. So it opened in March of 2020, was seen by nobody, closed up, and it stayed there. So these pieces, I don't even think we put them on the website or anything yet. But whenever I go home to Tijuana, I kind of look for excuses to break pieces off the fence, because the fence is next to salt water. And so it becomes a massive phyllo dough. So if you go and then little kids watch you and they're like, what are you doing? And then you all just break pieces off with little girls. And so anyway, so I go and take all these pieces constantly. And so I decided that I wanted to use the pieces, because I've used it as a rust to do dye with, that I wanted a reason to smash the fence and to pulverize the fence. And so then I ended up pulverizing the fence, making a pigment, dyeing the fabric with the fence, and this is what the stuff looked like when it would first come out. And then in that show, I had divided the gallery in half and was forcing people through this. The whole thing was about border emotion. It was called The Borderlands Within, and it was at the Armory in Pasadena. And so I used my body as a shuttle and then wrapped the fabric around myself to weave in and out. So this is gonna be, I think, the only video that I'll show you guys, and it's mostly so that you see the beginning, and then I'll speed through. I'll put it online someday soon. But a lot of what also the pandemic, a lot of what I did, so this is ongoing. So I'm in charge, I'm like stewarding this massive donation. It's like $600,000 worth of Bagu face masks that, because I do a lot of border aid and a lot of organization to help asylum seeker communities, Bagu was like, hey, we want to send you a donation. During the pandemic, they had been sending me the surgical face masks. And then suddenly in December, they were like, hey, you want some? And I was like, okay. Like, they were like, we have fabric ones. And I was like, cool. But then what showed up was 165,000 3-packs. And so then a huge part of the studio is also just like delivering these face masks to different indigenous communities. So indigenous farm worker communities in California, Native communities in the US, in the lower 48 and in Alaska. Also, a lot of them are going to recently settled Afghan refugees in the US. And then a lot of them, like 100,000 of them, I have to slowly smuggle into Tijuana. And so some of the exhibitions since then, and kind of the focus because of what's happening at the border and because of the pandemic, has also been trying to use, when an opportunity is given in a specific place, how can I use it to help people demystify their ability to enter into volunteering, helping with the situation at the border, because while the pandemic has been going on, in that exact same time is when we've had all these massive caravans of migrants. And so anyways, it's a very big issue that is ongoing. And so this was a show, I did the project room in Arizona, in Mesa, Arizona, and my friend Chanupa Hanska-Luger had done the exhibition on the other side. And so then he asked me, I helped him do workshops at the border to honor indigenous migrant lives that had been lost trying to cross the border. And so then this part of the gallery, I wanted to tell people about their region and how they can get involved. So the region that they were in Arizona was close to here, which all of these dots, it's old data on bodies that were reported of migrants that perished. And so the majority of this is in the area that is the Sonoran Desert, which is closest to the side of like Phoenix. And so a lot of it was doing research and sharing information with people, like how can you get involved? How can I share book lists with them? How can I share with them immigration statistics, volunteer opportunities, immigrant orgs to support? So just making it really easy for people to not just like click a like, but actually like get more information that's super practical and you can start getting involved now. And then also helping people understand what's needed at the border. What's needed at the border, and that the different needs are super different depending on like babies, like little boy, little girl, man, woman, LGBTQ folks. And all of this I learned through like smuggling all these packs into areas where migrants were, like migrant encampments. And then, like finding out like, oh shit, yeah, of course, like this other person's gonna need, like when we were asking all the like trans asylum seekers, we're like, what do you guys need? And they're like, we want bras. And I was like, oh shit, okay. And so some of the stuff is like for dignity, some of it is for survival, some of it is for, direct for food, some of it is for therapy. And then through Ambos, I've also been organizing distributions of survival packs for people crossing on foot, because crossing in your car also takes so long, and when the temperatures get really high, one old woman died in her car with her family while she was waiting to cross legally into the US. So some of it has also been trying to organize how can we get the US government to have a lane for disabled and elderly folks when they're crossing legally into the US. I also started 2.5 years ago a ceramics program at an LGBTQ asylum shelter. And so these are the self-portraits. They're called feminine portraits that our students made. A couple months ago, Ron Rael, kind of like big circle back. He ended up coming down, and this one refugee aid organization donated a 3D printer, ceramic 3D printer to the program. And so now we're also trying to figure out how do we use these other technologies in the work at the shelter. And then the students at the shelter also helped me make these copaleros, these incense burners, that in December I drove the whole US-Mexico border and installed them on the fence in different places. So it was 12 of them that we installed. And so we don't have any places in Mexico or at the border or even in the US that honor all the lives that were lost. And there's also no place to, like, with dignity, ask for safe passage. There's no place for you to honor your family members that you were separated from, that you haven't seen, anything like that. And so this was an act of empathy and compassion, and for us to have a dignified place to put our hopes. And so some of the places that they got installed on this side is, this is the only ferry that exists between the US and Mexico. It's in an area called Los Ébanos, and it's the ferry's hand pulled. So a bunch of dudes just like pull it with the cables and get you from one side to the other. And so every site kind of like called for super different like ceremony that was done there between me and my two friends that came with me. Here was another site where they had just deported 15,000 Haitian refugees. And the US military built this false wall with these shipping containers and then had these Hummers with like machine guns pointed at us. And so then that installation was in a very different, existed very differently. Areas, where it was, people had already intervened into the fence. This is, saying for gay folks, free pass, trans girls united. And so then because the majority of the students at the shelter that we work with are trans, this was for them as well. And so now, so where I'm at, this was a big project that I just finished for Freeze. I coordinated this like BIPOC like craft fair type of thing, but working mainly with nonprofits that are involved in social justice that are led by BIPOC folk. And so a lot of it was also in that learning about, what is art, and thinking about and questioning what is art, especially in a space like that, which is very like fine art based and very like gallery based and like blue chip based. What is art? What do normal people consider art? Who is normal people? Who is art for? And what can art do? And so I can go through this stuff later if you guys want, or I can leave them up so you can take pictures. But so in all those like 20 plus years of like working with community, I've now developed these like community engagement methodologies to kind of help me worksheet through like, do I get involved? Do you get involved? Who are all the players that you should be thinking of? Is somebody already doing what you want to do and just better? And should you just help them? Should you collaborate? Should you see like what's actually needed so that we don't cause more harm in communities? And so then I'll leave that little bit if you want to take a picture. And then that's the last page of it. And so, so a lot of what I do is, just travel around, tell people about different resources. And I can like cycle through this stuff, and you guys can take pictures, because I want to leave time for questions. I know like we're getting to the end, and so I can go back. But so Ambos has a massive list of a bunch of different things. Creative Capital, massive list of opportunities and stuff. You guys should also, whenever you're ready, apply for grants there. They're really incredible, and it's a very like handheld process of like trying to like train you to be a successful artist in like fiscally, like time management, like negotiating tactics, all kinds of stuff. This, even though it says youth, it's like good stuff for all of us. If you're thinking about community organizing and organizing around like issue-specific things, it's like 70-something pages of incredible information that's free. The hyperallergic viral list of opportunities. And then Paul, who's here in the back and is now your new like head honcho at Cranbrook, and I used to be on the board together of the Craft Emergency Relief Fund. And I urge you guys to look at it for any resources on getting ready for any type of disaster, thinking about even like how do we plan for like if we die? Like how do we make lists of, you know, that like safeguard like our legacy and the, you know, the legacy that we're all a part of as people that work, you know, as artists or craftspeople. Okay, I'm gonna stop. Questions?
Yes, and I know, okay. How you find the balance, I know I asked you a little bit about this in my visit with you, but how you find the balance between the work that you're doing in community projects and then your own personal studio practice and where they overlap, if they do, or as one, do they exist kind of as these separate headspaces to like serve their individual purposes? And then how you navigate that too in like museum exhibitions or like when you want to highlight something else or what gets to be like what you give voice to.
Some of the stuff, and I ended up putting these pictures in the end just in case. Some of the stuff like lives super compartmentalized in my brain. And then sometimes the stuff, if there's opportunity, depending on the like the venue or the client, then I can start to bring in other stuff into it. But for the most part, you know, I have to make these like massive pieces. Like these are just pieces that we did in the last few months, but I can't share images of them because the clients like don't allow me to. But I spend tons of time making these gigantic pieces. Like this one is 16 feet wide and I think 12 feet tall. And in those projects, like I just have to make, and I just get to kind of just be in this meditative space and be in a space where, like in the studio, it's almost like cooking together, you know, like whoever's around to help can help. If it's a little kid, cool. If it's not, then cool, whatever. And then everybody kind of gets to make, to learn together, to like use like the language in their hands to like, you know, like express themselves, you know, like, so like handwriting, people like weave really tight, or some people weave really loose, some people weave dimensionally. And so I get to kind of explore a little bit of community making in, when I'm exploring, you know, the making of commissions. Sometimes I get to bring in a little bit of like this has a bunch of elements of like curanderia, of like Mexican, Mesoamerican like shamanism. But like a normal person wouldn't see that like immediately. And then other times, you know, like this project, I think I'm gonna get to share actual pictures of the install in like a month. But this was like a 14-foot chandelier for a vineyard. And that one, they were like, we had to burn all these vines because they got sick. We want you to make a piece based on like the burn piles. So then this whole thing was like charred, and it was like my first basket, but it happens to be like 14 feet long and 7 feet tall, you know? And so in some of the stuff I still get to learn, I still get to think about community, and then some of it is just, cool, this project paid a bunch of money, so now I can afford to like spend, you know, a bunch of time doing community-based work. And then sometimes the community-based work informs, you know, like in the copaleros, in the incense burners, like that came out of like, oh, I'm working with clay, with migrants, and so like, should I collaborate with them, or do I just offer the service and let it be whatever they want it to be? Or do I also like bring them into the projects that I'm thinking of, and how I can navigate the border more safely as a person that can go back and forth between the US and Mexico, but also as a person that isn't, you know, at risk of experiencing like death and violence because of who they are, you know? And so some of it is, just kind of like connecting things where I can as much as possible. And then when people are like, no, you know, like if a museum is like, no, like we like, which has happened to me before, where they're like, we experience your work only aesthetically. Like, we're not gonna put a label on it explaining like how this was made, you know? And then I'm like, you know? And so then in those situations, then I have to kind of like figure out, okay, like how do I still have power in those situations? Like, what do I do? How do I push back? When like you count on those institutions or those like racist places to still be able to give voice, you know? So even like Freeze, like we were, all the organizations that I brought in to work with us, a lot of them worked with unhoused community. A lot of the folks were taking the bus from Skid Row over. And so we were at the Beverly Hilton next to the VIP lounge. And so there was a lot of tension there. And even like some artists of color didn't want to enter our space because we were the things that we were dealing with in the space that we created was we were talking about issues of, we were talking about death. We were also working with folks that serve disabled community. We were talking about a lot of really difficult issues that any person has a difficult time going into and saying, oh my God, like, you know, can I just sit here and witness this? Or how am I accountable to this part of who we are as humans, no? And so a lot of it is kind of also figuring out how to straddle and how to push, and like when you're given power and given a platform, like how much room can you take, and like at what given point in like whatever is happening politically, can you just like, you know, like expand and like make more room that's like lasting for other people to come through? And then when are you just smashing yourself, you know?
Thank you for giving the talk. My question kind of goes off of what you're already talking about, but I was curious to hear more about how you're thinking about your authorship when you're working with communities and other people that are contributing to things, and then, then how the context of where you're showing something, like something happened here with this group of people, but now it's being represented here, and like, hearing more about how you negotiate, like, what you want to be sharing.
Yeah, again, like super specific to like how much I ask of people and how much people are involved. And if it's like, you know, like a one-time thing and then they walk away, you know, and then, but they're told this is going to be part of this thing and this is going to be exhibited here. And then that's also part of empowering people, you know, like when we were doing the border quipu, it was going to go to the Renwick, which is, you know, a museum that's across from the White House. And so we were like, it's going to be across from the White House, you know, and people were like, yes, I want to participate, you know? And then, so then that's really different. Then like right now I'm working on a big piece that's going to the Oakland Museum of California Art. And that piece is for this massive feminist show that's going to open in July. And that piece, at the time, and I came up with it pre-pandemic, and it was supposed to open March of the pandemic. And I was gonna do an exorcism at the museum. And so I wanted to exercise like misogynist energy and like do this like I was like, I wanna like ask the director of the museum to sign a contract. about like including like more femme work, about including like more work, like buying more work that's specifically about like femme issues that never get represented. And I was like, I'm gonna do like a cleanse of the space, I'm gonna do all this stuff. And then I asked like femme folks to submit things that were about existing safely in femme bodies that were not represented in museums. And so then like 20 something people submitted stuff from like all over the world. And so then now all those pieces are getting woven into it's like a 20-foot tapestry. And so then they're all getting woven in there, and I'm like, I can't keep this. This isn't mine. This isn't mine to like, I also can't sell it because a lot of it is like craft-based stuff that people submitted. And it's also energy that like is supposed to, like it's supposed to exist as a talisman at a museum, you know, to kind of like generate and like protect. And so then like with that piece, I'm gonna have to figure out, and there's a book that goes with it that tells everybody's story, lists people's names if they wish to be listed. A lot of people are anonymous or wish to be listed anonymously. And so for that one, I have to like have my gallery find a place for me to donate it to. Or I have to figure out, you know, like what do I do? Because some of the stuff, yeah, it doesn't belong to me. And other stuff, yeah, it's like listing of, you know, the names of the people that participated. But it is super like project by project, you know, depending on like our engagement and I guess their level of engagement with participation. Everyone's so quiet.
Hi. I loved hearing you talk in our studio visit about like right after grad school you were gonna go work at a furniture design like
TV show?
Yeah. And it's so great because it's a testament to life being long and meandering and not knowing where you might be going.
Yeah.
And I just was wondering if you could talk about more maybe some like hard decisions or some pivots you had to make along that route to get to where you are, or things maybe that you didn't decide were just like the way life landed or something like. Does that make sense?
It does. So yeah, like a lot of the stuff has been pretty like many things very serendipitous, you know, where like I got into making furniture design. I got into furniture design because I lived on top of a mid-century furniture store. And like I would look in the window and then like the dude left a chair outside by accident, so I took it. And so then I was like, whoa, like living with objects that are like designed and like special like changes everything. You know, like there's a power to like actually having the agency to like bring beautiful things into your house and not just like live out of like poverty or like whatever you find, you know? And then that dude, I like went into the store and I was like, can I get an internship? And he was like, you don't get internships at stores. And then he was like, there's this young woman named Wendy that teaches at San Diego State. You should try to go there. But it was like pre-internet. I had no way of like researching like who Wendy was. And so then I just attended 5 different community colleges to work my way up to getting to study with Wendy. But I never knew who she was until I got there, you know? But I was like, yeah, he told me to do this, so I did it. Took me like, 7 years, but I'm here, And then, and then other stuff where it's like, starting to engage with like a different material and you're like, oh, wow, this like really connects with me. And I thought I spent so many years and so much student loans and studying furniture design, and I haven't done it for like 12 years. And so some of the stuff is just, I think, like we're ever changing, like the environment's always changing, like the situation politically is always changing. Like you have to just kind of remain open and flexible and like not judge yourself and just kind of think of like sometimes you have to do work because you need money and that's okay, whatever that is. But most of us like need to do work to also like make ourselves feel okay, and it's part of self-care. And so you just kind of have to be gentle with like if something is getting, like if you're having to do too much work, that isn't like satisfying your soul, then like just kind of edit out if you can, you know, or like take care of yourself in other ways and know that like you'll always come back to art, or it'll come back to you and it'll remind you. But yeah, a lot of the stuff was super random, you know, like it was like that TV show, like my friend called me and she was like, I just got a job at this like TV show and they need another person. Do you want to like interview? And I was like, okay. And so then I interviewed and I was like, all right. So then I like showed up to LA and I was like, I don't even know where this place is. And then, you know, Thomas Guide, old school, like how do I like get there? And it was like 2 blocks away from my house that I had just like rented, like sight unseen, you know? And I was like, okay, cool. I guess I work on a TV show now. That was super tiny and short, but it like allowed me to like keep making without having to buy the tools. And then once I didn't have tools, I was like, what am I gonna do now? So I was like, I'm gonna start sewing because I wanna keep making and I need to have things for sale constantly to like keep myself connected to like making and to have reason to make. And so a lot of it was, yeah, just like keeping busy, but also like hands in like many pots of like, I like always worked at like art museums and like the education department because I was like, oh yeah, like I can teach kids things. I can teach adults things if needed. Yeah, I can like, for a while I even designed shoes and made shoes. Like it was like super like massive amounts of like random things that have like made it so that I can survive when like the economy goes down. I have like little things for sale. When things get good, I'm like, I can make you big things, you know? So it's also just, you know, like the hustle is part of like, you gotta like see like where the current's going and you're like, there's an exit, woo, you know? And like, just let it be, you know? Like it'll all be fine. It's just art. Like we're not like doing surgery on somebody's brain and we're gonna kill them, you know? So yeah, like it's all right to like, yeah, like release some of the expectation. Yeah? No more? Your last chance. Okay.
Yeah. You mentioned a little bit like an example of somebody just wanting to experience your thing aesthetically, like an institution or something. And so I'm curious, like, I guess it probably depends on project to project, but how are you thinking about like framing your things overtly politically, and then also those things also just being within the objects themselves anyways?
Yeah.
And then, yeah, but then you like need context or you don't need context, like how do you think about negotiating, like, yeah, how you frame what you're doing?
Yeah, so a bunch of the stuff, honestly, I like center it in like humanness and like dignity. So it's not about like red or blue. It's about like the right thing to do as a human, you know? And so then it like, in that I try not to like have people that are like on the redder side, you know, be like feel like, oh shit, this is like an affront to my sense of being, like my like right to exist as this thing, right? So in a way trying to like, in the writing, or I guess in how sometimes like how the stuff gets made or displayed or whatever, trying to be apolitical because the things are already political, you know, like the fact that like a brown femme is making it is already a political thing. Like the fact that I'm doing it in like a subversive way, like using craft, which is like super like, you know, subjected to like lowerness, you know, and like the art hierarchy is already a political thing. The fact that like, you know, so all of it can be seen in ways of, you know, like stepping into power. So I don't feel like I have to give like a massive list of like, you did this, you did that, you know? But in some situations, like that show in Arizona, like I was like, oh, you know, and it's not about you did this, there's so much death all around you and this is how you can help, you know? And so it's really thinking of it from like a place of like a lot of it is honestly like coming from a place of nurturing and thinking about, like I'm a mother, like how do I handle situations with someone that isn't at the same like level of whatever as me, And so like to not want them to just turn around and like walk away or not listen. Like the best thing that you can do is like handle it really lovingly and with like a very like generously, rather than like confrontationally. Yeah. Yeah? Yeah? Okay.